Hello, and we are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince.
Vince, today's question comes from waffles!
Oh, I love waffles.
Yeah, me too. Both the guy and the tasty morning breakfast food.
Do you use syrup instead of lotion?
Lotion?
Yeah, like, you know, you get dry skin, put lotion on. Use syrup instead.
Is that a thing?
I don't know. Syrup's always made my waffles soggy when I eat waffles.
That is not what I thought you were going to ask me. I thought you were going to ask me if I use something else on my waffles other than syrup, and then when it went to soap, I was like, curveball.
Yeah.
Or lotion.
Yeah.
Not soap.
Soap lotion.
Okay, anyway, so Waffles would like us to talk about comics in educational settings. He says he is studying to be a teacher, and he wants to know what we think about comics as a literary medium taught in school. When should it be done? How should it be done? Is it even a valid thing? You know, up until just recently, it wasn't. You know, you didn't see people taking comics as a literary medium seriously enough that it would be taught in school. In fact, even calling comics literature was kind of
it was almost blasphemy.
Was kind of a taboo thing to say for a good long time. And I think in just the last, you know, maybe I want to say 10-15 years, we've been seeing comic classes cropping up in a lot of colleges and things. Though the one that the college we went to didn't have one.
No, I wished it would have, but because I feel like so much, and I realize this is a little soapbox, but I feel like so much of the time we get caught up in the commercialness.
It's a lotion box.
But we get caught up so much in it being a commercial medium that we forget that there are things out there that are artistic and not just entertainment.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, I will say this, if we can just jump in feet first,
absolutely,
I guess, unless there's anything we need to preface. But, I mean, it being a commercial medium is kind of like the big thing for, you can't treat comics like an art form because it's a commercial medium. Well, so is film. And,
yeah, sure.
You know, the thing that, what I like about film courses, and I didn't technically minor in film, I focused in film, take that as you will. But the thing that I like so much about...
It means you took film classes, but it doesn't mean anything.
It means they said, you need to choose something outside of an English major to go take. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go take a bunch of film courses, but which I enjoyed quite a lot. But the thing I liked about those classes, a lot of the classes were constructed to drive at a point, as opposed to say, well, we're going to discuss film from 1955 to 1958. And we're going to discuss violence in film.
So it was about the craft as opposed to the history.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, let's say, it was thematically. I mean, they had some things that were like pop culture of the 19 blah blahs. But,
and I've said this before, but I took a silent film course, so that was very, very, history based.
Yeah, they do have their history stuff, but those pop culture classes are fascinating because you can see how much something has permeated through a culture, and that's what I like about it. And you can use comic books the same way.
That's a great point. So you're saying part of the way we ought to study comic books is in how it affects the culture, not just in what the individual stories are.
Yeah, because by God, we should have a Superman in history course. We really should.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not just the Jesus reference, because you could use Superman as a good example of pop culture with how you make cultural, literary references within something that's not traditional literature, I guess we would call it.
Well, it's more the immigration influence, right?
Yeah, because they had this the big exodus of the Jews thing that Lieber and Stoller is not the right guy. Siegel and Schuster. Lieber and Stoller wrote Jailhouse Rock. Lieber and Stoller.
Little known fact, they also created Superman.
Good job, guys. Prolific.
Like 25 years earlier.
Oh, heck. But that was pretty fun. So, Lieber and Stoller.
We are clearly completely qualified to be having this conversation.
Indeed. So I mean, you have things that you can talk about, and you can also say, you know, I think it's almost important to say, like, how history influences pop culture, and use that as a jumping board to, or a launching pad, to say how pop culture has affected history. Like, you could say, this is why this is important, because of our culture and to our culture.
Yeah, well, it's art imitating life and life imitating art, right? You're looking at why, and what's funny is I've read, and I think you have too. I've read a couple of books about, like, the way World War II influenced comics and about like in the Cold War also, and we look. It's funny because we have a lot of historians that are looking at that at comics as a medium and how our history influence them in exactly the same way we do with films and with television and with music especially, right? Like, you take a class in music, and a lot of, especially popular music, and a lot of that is about, what was going on at the time the song was written, so why were they singing about what they were singing about, If people study, if people 20, 30, 40 years from now go back and study the period we're currently living in, they're going to find, you're going to see people looking at our culture and saying, okay, we were in a period of economic decline, and how did that influence what people were talking about in the movies they were making, what people were singing about. You and I talk all the time about how very edgy and kind of cynical our mindset is these days. If we ever start to get kind of out of that, we'll look back at this period and we'll pinpoint to these reasons that it's like that. Well, we can do exactly the same thing with comic books, and so not only do you look at the way the comics have changed the culture and evolved the culture, but you also look at the way the evolution of the culture affected the comics, and I think that's kind of the same thing. You're kind of I think you're gonna learn a lot of the same things by looking at those things, because they're gonna influence each other. It's gonna be a circle.
Based on that, you could almost say, because you have film courses that are considered film courses, or at least they do at KU, and they're really kind of overarching courses about culture in a more recent time period, because you always have your history courses up to this and then after this, and it stops at some point, and it's still kind of pretty early in history. I mean, it makes sense that they'd want you to study some of that older stuff. It's just not as fresh in the mind. But there are things that are heavily bearing on our culture that are current issues, if you want to define them that way.
Yeah.
That you can go back to the 60s and find something that's still affecting us today.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And I think that's stuff that we really need to study, and you could do that. I would say that maybe we should have a comic books until, or like the graphic medium until blah blah year, and then the graphic medium after blah blah year.
Sure.
And it would almost be worthwhile to, like, I would do it in 3 courses. If I realize now I'm just trying to plan a curriculum. That's a word now.
Oh, it'd be fun. Why not?
I'm also trying to rewrite the dictionary. Curriculum is now a word. So you have comic books prior to the comic book code.
It literally can also mean the opposite of stuff.
Indeed. So comic books prior to the comic book code, comic books during the comic book code, and comic books after.
That's fascinating, yeah.
Because I would say that would be great. 3 courses.
In a lot, in those second 2 that you're studying would be when comics were still for kids, and then when they stopped being so much for kids. Now, I always think there's a little bit of a danger of studying too much of what's going on right now without some distance, and looking at it, like, because I had a history professor back in college that said you really, and this is subjective, this was his opinion, but he believed that you shouldn't really study a period until a good 20, 30 years after it's happened, just to get some distance from it, and because he said, and I agree with him, he said that it's difficult to, and some people think you should wait even longer than that. He said it's difficult to get a good understanding until you get away from something of why things happen the way they did, because you are naturally living in the society too close to it right now. So it's so much easier to study the Cold War after there is no Cold War than while it's still happening, because it's not resolved yet, it's not finished, and then even after it is done, it's still, and I'm not saying that things don't have waves and that they're not still going to be permeating and causing
because while it's going on, there's still so much speculation that's happening that you can't say that you have a good handle on it, and you could be teaching something that's bull. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
I would say, though, that it's worth analyzing these things and digging into it and seeing if you can predict where those things go, but those people are called analysts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not students and teachers.
Yeah, we don't necessarily need to do that in history class. So, I like where this is going. We're basically saying that on one level, a good way to study comics in a school would be to look at history through the eyes of that medium. And I think it's a really good thing to do, especially in our country, in America, because we're studying an art form we invented.
Right.
And
it's kind of like studying jazz or the Western.
Exactly, and why was it so taboo to study that before? I mean, like, we were looking at the... I think we had classes even on children's literature well before we did comic books. Like, why is that an okay thing to study? Why is that somehow more worthwhile than studying comics? Now, I'm not saying that I would have beef with someone that would say that there's a lot of children's literature that is more important and influenced the culture more than a lot of comic books. That's fair. But I'm saying, looking at the actual medium, I'm not talking about the individual things that you would study. I'm saying looking at the medium at large. How was it created? Why was it created? Whether you like comics or not, it's a huge part of our culture. Yeah. And because so few people read them now in our country, it's very easy for people to look away from them and think that, like, they were never as influential, except for the fact that people latched on to some of these superheroes and we made big movies out of them. So I mean, like, you know, now those characters permeate and they're not going away and they're huge and stuff. But the actual medium itself of comic books, I think that you get a really interesting window of the period that they were created by looking at why they started in the first place and how that built up, just along with jazz and baseball and all the other inventions that are purely American inventions.
Alternatively, I think that we could potentially have a class that's set up based on a time period and what different kinds of pop culture are in that time period. So in school, I took a pop culture class of the 1950s. So, and I read some books about the 1950s. I read some books from the 1950s, about the 1950s.
I went back in time to the 1950s.
Yeah, it was really cool.
I played on stage, did some Johnny Be Good, and then I...
It was great. Chuck Berry.
Learned about it. Yeah.
They called me Marty. It was awesome. So,
Marvin Berry!
But, so we could have...
It's one of the best line deliveries in Back to the Future.
Yeah. So we could have one set of classes. I got to say this before I forget it. So we have one set of classes as we've just discussed, and we could potentially also have another set of classes where we're just incorporating it into the class. What about that time period are we already studying that we can further explore using comic books?
Yeah.
So that is another way to just sneak it in there. If you don't want to have a comic book class,
you're looking at it through a lens.
Yeah, and especially if you're a teacher who is working for a school and you're doing a pop culture class, it would almost be unarguable that, especially if it's like 1950s where you could talk about the comic book code, that this wouldn't be relevant.
And not just the history of comic books, but what the comic books were talking about and why, or what they weren't, because of the comics code.
The 60s would be a heck of a time.
Yeah.
Because then you have all of that radiation scare, and you have the comics are a perfect place to mine for that, because then you have Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and the Hulk, because that's what Stan Lee's major. Well, we're all up in arms about radiation right now. Let's just use that.
Well, you go to the Golden Age. You can look at I could see a whole subsection of a history course through the lens of comics about comics used as propaganda. You know, like we're perpetuating certain ideals of Americanism and of patriotism.
That would be awesome,
because that happened.
You know, that would almost be great to just say propagandism in pop culture, and then you look
and that's a part of it. Yeah,
you have a comics portion, you have a movie portion, you have a whatever portion. I mean.
But of course, we don't want to count out comics as potentially good literature as well, and it's very easy, of course, for me to say that because you know, that's one of the big things I do. I study comics as a literary medium and analyze it. So it would be really silly for me to be the guy that said, well, comics are by nature and have always been a commercial medium, and therefore they don't have anything to say. Well, I can't stop studying Watchmen. You know what I mean? And that's always my go-to book. But of course, there are plenty of other things.
Because that's kind of the great equalizer. People outside of the comic book medium have been, whoa, that's a really great book.
That's a thing, yeah. And then you know, and outside of more, there's plenty of other things as well. And so, but it would be also ridiculous for me as a reviewer of comic books and as someone that sees it as a legitimate medium to say that there isn't more kind of just silly, fun, stories that aren't really about anything than there are really
there's
deep,
more
interesting,
there's
important.
Good, but that's true of
but
every
that's true of
movie.
everything, and that's where and that's what I was getting to. Yeah, exactly. So you'd have to be kind of careful about what you picked. You know what I mean? Studying comics in a literary way, but I think you could do both.
I gotta say this because this is very true of studying English literature. I mean, of course, I haven't studied Italian literature or any of that stuff because I speak English. It's kind of my downfall. I got the one. But, when you look at, when you're studying English literature, so much of the time you're not studying good things, you're studying significant things.
That's a really good point. But but the problem is, you have a lot, and this isn't true of everybody. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off in the middle of a thought.
Well, that's fine. I just want to get it out there. We can explore it.
Professors, there are too many professors that think those are synonymous, right?
Yeah, because
we
it's
both
really not.
Have had that. There are too many people that, and sometimes I wonder if it's that a professor that you have a class with, or even a teacher in high school, like studying a piece of literature, if they really love it as much as they pretend that they do, or if it's not just that they have to look enthusiastic to try to make the kids they're teaching have any kind of interest in it, and pay any kind of attention to them.
Right.
So they have to tout it up as great, even if it's not. But yeah, there's a huge difference between great literature and influential literature. Clearly, the same is true of comic books.
And I would say that that's true of both literary, I'm going to call that literary, but bear with me. I'll call it the artistic medium and then the commercial medium.
Yeah, sure.
Because so many people are about, oh, you haven't read this book. Wonderful book. You should really read this book. You would learn so much about your society. And then, so you read that book, and then you say, that was the most intensely dull book I have ever read. I understand why it was significant for its time period, because I read the preface.
Yeah.
But it's also, there's no character arc, there's no moment of blah blah. This is just a bunch of words that are culturally significant. And then you have people in the commercial medium who do the same thing. Now, not to say that there's no, I'm not taking a pot shot at Frank Miller here. I'm just relaying an actual event. A friend of mine said, here, read this.
But you do that as a matter of course anyway,
That's
so
right.
why would you even worry about that?
A friend of mine said, here, read this. It's the most amazing thing you're ever going to read. He hands me Dark Knight Returns.
Sure.
And I read it, and I go, that was good. And I handed it back to him. And he said, what'd you think? I said, oh, I thought it was all right. He said, but this is the most significant Batman book ever written. And I went,
well, I can't.
Cool your jets, bud.
Yeah. And also, you can't necessarily get that just from reading a thing, right? Like significance is not embedded in a work.
Yes.
If it was, then every album that ever went platinum, the band would have known it as they were making it. Right. This is not the way art works. And let's use that to segue into a little bit of discussion of the difference between art and commercial success, right? Because it is wrong to say that because something is successful, it is successful commercially, it is effective. It is effective at what it was setting out to do. But it is also at exactly the same time kind of wrong to say just because something is commercial means that it can't be effective that way, or that it isn't art. And so there are lots of things that cross that line, that blend those. And what I don't understand is why for so long we understood that with film, but we could not get our minds around it with comic books. Now I say that perplexed me. I guess it didn't. I guess part of it again is because not only were comics commercial by nature, just as film primarily is, but also aimed at a whole medium aimed mostly at a younger demographic. That is the one thing that comics have had in the past that no other medium ever had, except for video games. But video games weren't considered a literary medium until relatively recently. So video games have evolved into a medium where it is possible for them to be literarily artistic pieces. I believe this now. I think this can happen. I think it's harder.
I think part of something else that's significant here is that even film, having been around for quite a long time now, is still a reasonably new medium in comparison to a lot of the other stuff we study. So, I mean...
And comics aren't that much newer than film.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we've had cartoons predating film.
Yeah.
So any funny little quip in a newspaper that has a drawing to it is a little cartoon, and that's kind of
that was the precursor to
precursor. I mean, comics are the evolution.
That's the precursor to comic strips. Comic strips are collected into comic books, and then it starts occurring to people to tell full-blown stories through those pages, and that's how you get comic books.
And you have people like Will Eisner who are kind of the front runners of that.
That's right.
So I mean, and there's loads of books written on this. So there's people who are deeply interested in comic books as a purveyor of cultural commentary.
Yeah, and there are people who make a living as comic book historians, and were doing that back when it was, considered really lowbrow. And don't get me wrong, comics by and large are still kind of considered lowbrow, but they're also for, at least in literary circles. At least in literary circles, but also they're no longer primarily printed for children. And we've talked about this before, where kids grew up, and it's gotten to the point. It wasn't like this over multiple generations, but it's gotten to the point now that the same people that were reading comic books when they were kids are the people that they're printing comic books for now.
You go into at least a decent comic book store, they have a children's rack, and it's significantly smaller than the rest of the store.
Yeah, we didn't used to have that. So, I mean, the future of this medium is going to be really interesting. But don't you think that has a lot to do with the reason that it's becoming more acceptable to study this, that people that colleges are starting to consider this more of an acceptable thing to study? That adults are reading this thing now.
I wonder if it doesn't have something to do with comics being kind of a gold mine for movies. I
think that has something to do with it, sure.
Because now we're starting to get this kind of blurring between movies and comic books, where comic books, I think, are really trying their best to be like movies. So
yeah, that's right.
Or at least be on the scale that you would see in movies.
We always said that comics were. Even before we had a lot of comic book films, we always said that comics looked like storyboards.
Right.
And then now they really look like storyboards. In fact, they look like movies. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So tonally, we're starting to get a lot of the same stuff.
They're paced more that way. That's a really good point. They have more of a cinematic pacing, a cinematic pacing. But because Daffy Duck has now taken over my body. But
that's right.
It's weird. Daffy Duck possession is a strange thing.
I really thought you were going to go somewhere important with that.
Weird. But the other thing is, I still kind of wonder if part of it isn't just simply a matter of interest. If there are more adults that consider comics a viable place to tell real stories. So I'm sure there are plenty of people that are worried about this. I'm sure there are plenty of literary people that look at that and say, okay, we're dumbing down the culture by looking at comics as a legitimate literary thing. But I think you just have to be cautious about it, and I think about what you study, but also how you're studying it. Are we looking at the history of this, or are we looking at it as a legitimate literary piece? But the third thing is what you were talking about earlier with Dark Knight Returns, and there's nothing against Dark Knight Returns, but also are we looking at this as a really deep, insightful piece of literature that tells us something that's getting at some kind of human truth or historical truth or something, or are we looking at it in relation to the effect it had on the culture, or can we do both? I think with something like Dark Knight Returns, we can do both. I think that is a pretty artistic piece.
I think we can do both. I think it's problematic because most schools don't try to do both. They just try to do what's the cultural effect.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a really good piece of literature. It's what matters is that it had effect, and thereby I think you would be more likely to get the historical classes.
But we also need, I think that what a lot of those classes do, and not just with comics, I think they tend, like we said earlier, to look at them and say, if they are historically significant, that must mean that there's something genius to it. And that's not
necessarily
the case, right? So I think you have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. I say that about a lot of things, where you look at different pieces that were really influential, and you say, okay, what is this really getting at, or is it getting at anything? I tried to take an online course about comics, and I quit really quickly. Have I told you about this?
You didn't tell me that you quit.
I quit really early because, and I'm not gonna say like
because school is or whatever.
I'm not gonna say any of that because I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to be mean to anybody, but I watched the first video lecture, and the guy said something that I instantly thought was really off, and that was because I thought that he was like discounting the worth of studying this as a subject in his own class about comic books. And I thought that was really strange. It was the sort of thing where he was trying to figure out a validation for it, for why you would even study comics, and he couldn't come up with anything. So, which I thought was really strange. So what he said was,
if you were really that interested, why wouldn't you be able to come up with anything?
Well, I think it was a matter of trying to look like he had. He was overcompensating for something. It was like he was saying, okay, I understand that comics are commercial by nature. I understand that they are not inherently literary. Nothing is inherently literary. That a lot of these things really were early on kind of just funny books, or like
so
that sort of thing.
Really.
Yeah, but what he said was part of the point of the course is to explore. And I just thought this was ethereal and weird. It was this is out there, I thought. Part of the point of our course is going to be to explore the reason we're here, and I couldn't go any farther than that. After that, I thought that was really strange. It was like I guess we're doing this because comics are popular and people want to learn about them. So we're gonna do this course, and I love them, but I can't validate my love for the medium because it's not really, there's not really anything about the medium that makes it worth studying on the, at this intensity. And so we're gonna we're going to try to explore the reason that we're here while we're doing this. That bothered me.
I get the impression that people tend to look at comics and say, well, we need a comic class. So they say, here's a class on comics.
And I think it's just because there's a lot of it.
And that's ridiculous. That's a book club. That is, you need to have direction in a class. You can't
and to be fair, I didn't go any farther, so I don't know. I don't know if he did. I don't,
Yes.
And I saw his reading list. I liked
that just makes me nervous when I hear comic classes, because that's what I think it's going to be.
Interested in a lot of the things that he was studying, that they were going to study, and I had read some of it and hadn't read some of the rest of it. And they were doing big mainstream stuff, but they were also doing some more indie things. I don't know. I kind of, and also I didn't have a ton of time anyway. So. That was also part of the reason that I didn't go pursue it. But I mean, I watched that first lecture and I was just like, I feel like he's discrediting the whole idea of doing this, and that really bugged me. But yeah, this is going to be my final thought on this. Comics, as a medium. As I've said before, you can tell any story in it. It's just like film. It's just like literature. And for all the reasons you and I have discussed in the past, it's not generally accessible to all kinds of people because it is difficult for people that have never read a comic book before to understand how to pace their reading of it, because you do have to pace your own reading. Comics don't pace themselves. That's something that's something movies can do, and that comics cannot do. So you have to figure out how long you think you need to look at a panel, and get the information out of it that you want to. But that's all. That can also be kind of a freeing experience, depending on how you look at it. So just because it's not accessible to all people doesn't immediately invalidate it as a medium, and it also doesn't negate the fact that there are stories that can easily be told in comics that are much harder to tell in film or even in prose for various reasons. And we've talked about these things. And so studying the medium, I think is a really good idea. And studying the history of it and how it's influenced things and how things have influenced it are also a really good idea. And most importantly, I don't think for all the reasons that we've stated in this video, I don't think we have to sit around and try to come up with a validation for studying comics. I think it's right there. I think it's really obvious why we would want to study comic books.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final thoughts are...
This is coming from a passionate person that has spent a lot of time studying comic books. But, like, I understand why we would want to do this. And all you have to do is go to a movie theater at almost any given weekend, and you'll see how it's influenced society. You know? So we should be studying it on multiple levels.
I mean, I guess my final thoughts are going to be that there was a class at KU called Representation, and it was representation of gender, race, and something else. I forget. Ethnicity, maybe. But
what's the other really important thing? Religion, ethnicity.
I have no idea. But it was
breakfast preference,
bathroom schedule.
So we've realized that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people that like bacon and people that like sausage.
There are 10 kinds of people in this world.
And vegetarians.
And vegetarians. That's pretty funny. I like that. I'm sorry. There are 10 kinds of people in this world. People who can read binary, and people who can't. That's not my joke. I just thought it was great.
That doesn't make it any less funny. Anyway, I'm sorry. Your final thoughts, Vince.
But I guess my final thoughts
What's your breakfast preference?
Usually an omelet or like shredded wheat or something.
That sounds really good.
I like omelets. Cheese and chicken.
I like shredded wheat too.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Honey and bananas on shredded wheat. It's pretty good. Kashi shredded wheat's really good. Anyway, Kashi, I recommend it. So, it's a different video. I guess my final thoughts on this here are essentially that comic books should be studied like any other kind of thing. And like, I really think that we should be studying gender in comic books. We should be studying violence in comic books. We should be studying the evolution of the hero in comic books. We should be studying the darkening trend of comic books, or we should be studying the reflection of film in comic books. There's so many ways that you can go with a single semester course. That I mean, even if it's a 1 day a week course, I mean, there's so many things, there's so many directions you can go with this stuff, and just pulling examples. You don't need to say that every example we pull is going to be the highest quality literature. We're pulling examples that make sense. We're pulling, if we're talking about the feminist movement, we're going to be pulling some 60s Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Because we need to be talking about her losing her powers and everything, and adapting with that, and being empowered, and yada yada. If we're going to be talking about, we could talk about blaxploitation in comic books.
Sure.
And you could use Luke Cage.
There's lots of interesting things in the 70s, yeah, sure.
There are all sorts
drug
of things.
culture and like the period where we weren't allowed to talk about that stuff, and then suddenly when the floodgates opened, what that you know Green Arrow in the mid 70s, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, that stuff.
So I mean, we have all of this stuff that we can be using. That people are like, well, I need to justify a way to study it. No, you need to justify a way of studying comic books in a single course. That makes no sense, because then you're just saying, well, today, guys, we're gonna study boxing gloves.
Yeah, sure.
Well, all right. I guess if you just want to study something that's nondescript, because at that point you, as it seems like your teacher was going to, you're studying something that's adjacent to it. Let's look at why we're here. No, you're getting the point that that you need to study something through the medium, but you don't understand that this medium has significance throughout culture and that it echoes. So that's how you study it. You don't just say, well, this is an interesting point. You, Becky, in the book club. What'd you think, Becky? See, that's not a good way to run a class. I don't care what you do.
Well, and we have to get away from we have to pretend like it's a class, but really we just want to be a bunch of geeks getting together to read comic books. You know,
you want to avoid that. Indeed.
I think anybody that is looking at the history of America could see that comics are an important part of that, and might want to study it even if they're not into it.
You should be able to develop a course syllabus that makes sense, that has direction for a class, and has dates that these things are going to be reached, because it builds upon itself. Any class that you walk into and people say, so what'd you guys think? That's a hard class to be in, because your teacher has to be awesome at pulling stuff out of his book.
Vince, on that note, let's go ahead and go on to rant, shall we? What is your rant for today, sir?
Today my rant is... I get really annoyed by the idea.
I know. That's a good rant. You get so annoyed.
I do.
And, sorry.
I get really annoyed by the idea that people think that you can just knock someone out.
Can you not do that?
No, you can't. You know why? Because if you just knock someone out, you've given them a concussion, which is a minor brain injury. That's it really drives me nuts
when I'm like half the episodes of TOS.
Fair enough. It drives me nuts when people are like, you know what, Cap? I'm sorry, but this is for your own good. Bam! And then they're unconscious, and they're like, we need to get him back to the ship. That's stupid. Wait up. That's dumb, because it makes no sense.
If you could do your entire rant like that.
You know, I kind of love shows where somebody does this. This is for your own darn good. And they hit him, and they're like, why would you do that? It hurts so much. Well, I'm sorry, but let's try it again. Ow! Well, maybe this will work if you hit me with that rock.
Oh, I guess the tranquilizer was in my other fist.
It makes no sense. I think it's ridiculous. So, there's not a lot that I have to say about this, but that it's everywhere. People think they can just knock someone out.
It's all over the place.
But you can't just knock someone out. I mean, you can if you hit them hard enough.
Safety tip.
But you know what? They're probably not going to wake up immediately fine an hour later. I mean, they're not going to go, oh, that was just like taking a nap.
Doesn't that mean that
you got knocked out?
Doesn't that mean that most superhero fight sequences don't make any kind of sense?
Yeah, it really doesn't.
Because you'll have like a superhero that'll fight like a dozen guys, and he'll punch a guy and he'll go down. He'll punch another guy and he'll go down, and those guys never get up again.
Yeah, I mean, unless.
But they would get up again, right?
I mean, that's essentially what these people do. They're like, oh, they got knocked down, and now, unless they're just being disoriented
and they get up again,
and they're captured.
They're never going to knock you down. They get up.
So if I were to knock Cap down, subdue him,
I'd get up again.
Like wrestle him to the ground, tie him up, and now suddenly he's all, you caught me, you rascally kids. Yeah, sure, whatever.
That means ultimately what Batman really needs to do is have all of his batarangs attached to ropes. He's just constantly throwing batarangs and they go around.
And also, I think, there's something to be said for a superhero to be able to take control of a situation. So, yeah, I can walk in and through intimidation, I can take control of a situation. Why not? What's your rant, Kev?
My rant is I don't understand why more and more TV network websites want you to already have a subscription to a cable provider in order to watch their TV shows. Why is that? I don't understand. How are they losing any money out of putting ads? Because the way they make money in the first place on television is by putting ads in commercials. They should stop a commercial to put an ad in a commercial. I had to buy a subscription to Hulu Plus finally. Yeah. Just so that I could watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because I don't buy cable, because I just don't watch enough cable television, and I've always watched everything on networks' websites. More and more, it's becoming hard to do that, and I mean, like, they've already done a lot of things to try to get people to either to try to get people to get a cable provider and watch on television, which I still don't understand why that's a priority for them, but also just so that, like, people aren't taking advantage of that as a service. So I totally understand. I totally understand why a lot of these TV shows will have like the last 4 or 5 episodes, and then they drop things off before that, so that they're forcing you to keep up and watch their commercial. Okay, fine, I get that. That's fine. I can be responsible enough to be no more than 3-4 weeks behind. Okay, I can do that. But why do I need a cable provider? Because the thing is, A, like I said, I don't see how they're losing money. B, why would I want to watch the show there if I have a cable provider? I mean, I guess it's so that I can watch it on demand without taping it. You know what I mean? Without. Okay, that's an old thing we old people at VCRs used to do. TiVoing, or however people record things.
Digital
recording, yeah. So I mean, you don't have to take that step of, okay, I'm going to record this. Okay, maybe people are using it for that. I don't know. Maybe people with Hulu are using it for that. But then that's the whole reason you get Hulu, is so you don't have to get a cable provider, because then that's the one way you can get around it. It's like someone has to make money. They don't care who. They just want to make sure that you are taking money out of your wallet in order to watch things. Like, maybe
support your local cable provider.
Maybe Hulu gives a percentage of that to each of the networks they work with. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe they're getting a piece of my $8. I don't really know how this works. I guess I could have done some research before this rant. I don't know exactly how it works. But somebody please explain to me how ABC is losing money when I go to when I go to their website and watch a show and I didn't watch it on cable. I don't understand this, but I find it incredibly inconvenient. I don't feel like I should have to have a membership to Hulu in order to do that. I mean, yeah, I get it. I'm saving money. I'm kind of, trying to take the easy way out by watching these things for free instead of paying for cable. But you know what? They don't get money from the cable company. Like, the only people that make money from the cable company is the cable company. I pay for an internet connection, so I'm not trying to steal anything. Like, it's not illegal to TiVo things. I don't understand why I can't go on a website and watch a show. I don't get that.
I agree.
So anyway, that really annoys me. I was able to do this for years, and in just the last couple of years, they've been... Boy, I guess I'm annoyed about that. I am really annoyed about this. In just the last couple of years, well, because to be frank, if I can just be completely honest with everybody, I only watch TV right now for shows I do. You know, because I'm busy with other things, and my priority these days is comics and then movies. I don't watch a lot of TV, and except for older stuff that I do videos on. So so basically, I bought a subscription to Hulu just so that I can do S.H.I.E.L.D. discussions. That's ridiculous. Like, I shouldn't have had to do that.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my rant. That annoys me.
I get super annoyed when at some point I got annoyed when I realized that I couldn't watch everything online and just stopped, because I was like, I just don't care anymore. These people make it hard for me to get to their stuff, and I don't want to give you guys $100 extra a month just so I can get that one channel that I want to watch that one show from. And
I think we've all done that, except for people who do watch TV all the time. And I mean, nothing against anybody. I was never like that. Like, I always had. I'm pretty picky about what I like to watch, and so there was a period of time where we did have cable, and we kind of hoped there'd be more things we'd want to watch, but ultimately it boiled down to back then. This was in the good old days when sci-fi was spelled like sci-fi, and put sci-fi shows on their channel. We watched Sci-Fi Channel a little bit. We watched Game Show Network, and like one or two other things. That was about it. Like,
yeah.
So that's why we don't pay for cable anymore.
I
feel like the idea of cable is outdated now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that.
Like, I feel like we're in a day and age because of streaming, because of like the new Netflix model and Amazon and stuff, where everybody binge watches now. Like, it's just outdated. I'm not saying we shouldn't have broadcast television anymore, but I think internet and TV are coalescing more and more, and I feel like when those websites do that, it's like they're delaying the inevitable. I think they're in denial about the fact that the medium is changing.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
You know? So, I mean, like, they're probably going to make more money and make people happier and ultimately, cultivate better relationships with their viewers in the long run if they accept the change.
Yeah.
This is how I feel about it. So, I'm talking to you, network providers. Anyway, well, everybody, thanks as always for watching Geeks Not Nerds. We sure had a fun time discussing comics in college, and we'd like to know what you think about comic book classes and how you have you ever taken a college class in comic books? Anybody that's done this, I'd like to hear from you. Tell us what your experiences were like.
And everybody who's taken a college class just went, oh, on comic books. That's right.
I took a college class on bioethics. Oh, that's not common. So anyway,
maybe there's a comic books with bioethics coming through.
Leave your comments about courses you took if you happen to have done that, or also just what you think about this topic in general, and also if there's an idea you'd like to share with us about a video we could make in the future, a question you want to ask for Geeks Not Nerds, leave that in the comments as well, or feel free to send those to our inbox, personal message us on Geekvolution. That's a quicker and easier way to get a hold of us. And in the meantime, we'll see you later. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince, reminding you to support your local comic book store.
See you later.